The firing of head coach Dennis Allen is a move the New Orleans Saints absolutely needed to make because it was the right one. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the New Orleans Saints have officially fired head coach Dennis Allen. We're going to take a look at what this means for their eye towards the future as the next era of New Orleans Saints football is on the way. We'll take a look at what's immediately next for the New Orleans Saints, who will take over at head coach, how the New Orleans Saints will treat the rest of the season. We'll dive into all that. But we're going to start today and kick things off with the firing of Dennis Allen, why it makes sense, why the New Orleans Saints had to make the move. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day, for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, where you can get a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win that first $5 bet, just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, good morning, New Orleans, and the future is here. You've woken up in an alternative timeline, and one that I'm sure that many of you are excited to see. And look, when I say excited to see, I want to always kind of preface these types of things with, obviously, there are real life human beings that are a part of this, with real life families who need real life jobs to get them real life fed and real life safe. There's no doubt about that. But the New Orleans Saints absolutely needed to make this move. The New Orleans Saints franchise was once upon a time, in a not too distant future, not too distant past, rather, a team that was built on streaks, playoff streaks, win streaks at home. Remember, with a dome field advantage, all of that. Streaks like the defense not allowing 100-yard rushers, all of those pieces. The New Orleans Saints now are a team of firsts, and that has been the story of Dennis Allen's career and tenure, rather, as the New Orleans Saints head coach. Yesterday, the New Orleans Saints suffered their seventh straight loss for the first time since 1999. They became the first team in the last 20 years to lose a game in which they outgained an opponent by 150 plus yards and won the turnover battle, only to lose that game. They opened up the opportunity for quarterback Bryce Young to see his first victory formation of his career. That will be the end of the story for Dennis Allen, as Dennis Allen becomes the first head coach the New Orleans Saints have moved on from or had depart mid-season since Jim Mora in the 80s. And that was a resignment. This was a firing. And this was a move that the New Orleans Saints needed to make. Again, with all due respect to the humans that are impacted by this story, there is nothing about what the New Orleans Saints have done over the course of the last 3 years, and especially this historic, for New Orleans, 7-game losing streak that they're experiencing right now, that they have extended against the NFL's worst team in the league, a team that they absolutely throttled to open up the season. There is no way that you can move past this and not make a change. One thing that we know in all walks of life, every single walk of life, no matter what background you come from, what job you work, what things you believe in, what things you don't believe in, is that resentment travels. Resentment moves along. And when you, as an organization, are faced in a situation like this, you have to keep resentment from traveling. That's why you have to make this move if you're the New Orleans Saints. You move on from Dennis Allen immediately, because if you don't, or if you didn't, right, the Saints did, but if you didn't, then players begin to resent that coach. And let me tell you, I spoke with a couple of players this morning from both sides of the football that have multiple years experience working with Dennis Allen after Nick Underhill's report over at New Orleans Football about Dennis Allen losing the locker room. Asked them, what would you say? What do you have to say about the idea of Dennis Allen losing your locker room? One player simply said yes. Another player simply said, been lost, as if the locker room had been lost. So you have to do this. And so you see the resentment that was already starting to pile up for Dennis Allen. If you as an organization, Gail Benson, Mickey Loomis, Dennis Lauscha, the New Orleans Saints organization as a whole, didn't make this move today, that resentment moves from Dennis Allen and straight to you, the decision maker, for having that guy still in that building, having that guy still at that podium, and having that guy still in those team meetings and on that sideline. That resentment travels. And when that happens and that permeates, your organization then gets into new general manager conversations, new ownership conversations, and all those things. Gayle Benson and the New Orleans Saints did the right thing by moving on from Dennis Allen when it came to this move. And now, look, this isn't going to make the season better moving forward, right? The Saints are 2-7 through their first 9 games. They're not mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, but they're realistically eliminated from the playoffs. They have 8 games ahead. You're not going to turn the season around just because Dennis Allen has been fired, but you now begin to have an eye towards building and laying the foundation for what your future becomes for your team. That is the big thing. I'm in an airport lounge right now in like a little booth because the New Orleans Saints made this move. This is how much I did not expect the Saints to actually do this, by the way. I did not expect that they were actually going to make the move in season, but I think it was the right thing to do. We've talked about that several times here on the show. Everydayers will remember that we know what New Orleans Saints should do. The question is, would they do it? And they absolutely got it done. So it's what needed to happen here. And now the Saints can focus on moving forward throughout the rest of this season, evaluating its talent and getting a look at how it's going to build its future. And that could mean departures. So you can build through addition, but you can also build through subtraction throughout this season to help your future salary cap situation, all those other things. Make no mistake about it. Dennis Allen will be right back in the NFL. He will be right back in the NFL. He's going to be a defensive coordinator again. He absolutely deserves that. He's one of the better defensive minds in the NFL. That's where he's going to go. But for the New Orleans Saints, what they do after this season is wrapped up needs to be all about how they move into their new leadership and their new era. They won't be able to get to that, though, until the season is done. So coming up next, what I want to take a look at is what the immediate impact of this head coach firing is for the New Orleans Saints, who will take over, where they turn, and how they approach the rest of this season. Let's dive into all of that next as we continue to break down the firing of head coach Dennis Allen here on the Locked On Saints podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends at Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon in order to be able to eat up all the financial favors of the top 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks that are usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn a very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change, and gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. It's super simple. It's not you versus a bunch of mystery lineups that you don't see that you're going up against. Instead, it's you, your knowledge of your favorite sport, favorite player, favorite team versus the house. It's super simple. Prize Picks gives you a projection based on a player. Depending on which sport you choose, you might go football, you might go pro, you might say, Jamar Chase, Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver, 79.5 receiving yards. For instance, you pick more or less than that. You do that for 2 to 6 players, and that's it. That's all you got to do. If you get up to 4 right, you can get up to 100 times your entry back. I love Prize Picks because it's super easy to play and a lot of times super easy to win as well. So go check them out today. Download the app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL so you can get $50 instantly after you play your first $5. That's $50 instantly with the promo code LOCKEDONNFL when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints have moved on from New Orleans Saints head coach Dennis Allen and now must embrace their reset for the rest of this season by evaluating their roster, picking the right leaders and trying to rebuild the culture. Those are things you need the New Orleans Saints to do as the rest of this season rolls along. We appreciate you very much for being here. So now we're taking a look. We broke down why, the logic behind the move of moving on from Dennis Allen, why it was necessary, how it gets done, all those other things. Now let's take a look at the ripple effect, right? What do you do immediately? Well, let me tell you the things that we know. What we know so far is that the New Orleans Saints will appoint special teams coordinator and assistant head coach Darren Rizzi as their next head coach. We've talked about this millions of times here on the show that would be the right choice. Let me explain why I think it's the right choice in case you haven't heard already. The reason why I think that the appointment of Darren Rizzi as the interim head coach is the right choice is because he's your special teams coordinator. Special teams coordinators make fantastic interim head coaches. Why? Because they have a relationship with everyone on both sides of the football. Special teams is not an offense or a defensively kind of populated area of the game. You need players from offense. You need players from the defense to help you on that side. Darren Rizzi works with both sides of the football. The other thing that I look at too is that throughout the rest of the season, you're going to be evaluating your young talent. No one has a better relationship outside of the individual position coaches with the young talent on the roster outside of the special teams coordinator, because a lot of young guys make rosters because of what they do on special teams. So I think that Darren Rizzi was the perfect decision, the perfect hire, the perfect appointment when it comes to managing the head coaching sort of next steps for the New Orleans Saints. On the other side of that, the next thing that you're going to be looking at is who's going to be the defensive play caller. Because remember, when you move on from Dennis Allen, you're not just moving on from the head coach, you're moving on from the head coach and your defensive coordinator in this situation, right? He's your defensive play caller, all those other things. So I think that the easy kind of decision here is that you appoint your defensive coordinator, Joe Woods, as your defensive play caller as well. So that's already kind of built in. It's an easy pivot when it comes to where the Saints go from that point. So Darren Rizzi will be the interim head coach. I expect that Joe Woods will be the defensive play caller here moving forward. So here's where I think you go next, right? So you get that set up, you have your leadership, you're ready to go. I think the next thing is that you build the culture. Darren Rizzi is a fantastic culture builder. Throughout this season and really throughout the past few years, when you've heard players come out and start to quote coaching staffs and stuff like that, they're often quoting Darren Rizzi. I think back to just a few weeks ago, tight end Juwan Johnson was up at the podium and he was talking about everybody doing their 111th. That's a Darren Rizzi motto, and he gave Riz credit in that moment. It's also great to be able to talk about Coach Riz. That's going to be a lot of fun for me. So brace yourselves for that. Sorry, and you're welcome at the same time. But the other piece of it too is that you get that culture builder there. Darren Rizzi is not a kumbaya kind of, player forward, you get your way, you get a lot of leeway type of coach. He's a hard-nosed, yell, get you going, get you motivated kind of guy. That's what the New Orleans Saints need now, because there were already reports, as we discussed earlier, of the team losing the locker room, or at least Dennis Allen losing the locker room. So now you have to get somebody that's going to be able to wrangle all that in, somebody that already has a lot of relationships with a lot of players, somebody that the players respect. That's Darren Rizzi. Darren Rizzi now gets to step in and help you be able to rebuild your culture because you are in need of that. The other reason why I like Darren Rizzi as the interim head coach is because a lot of the other issues that you've seen from the New Orleans Saints came down to game management, clock management, things like that. Darren Rizzi, as a special teams guy, not only does the kicking, the punting, the returning areas like that as his focus, he also focuses situationally on fourth downs, on certain situations and things like that. And so I would look at that. Joe Woods, moving into the defensive coordinator, he was and is a big part of their red zone. That's his focus area. The cornerbacks and the red zone are a part of are two of his big focus areas over the defensive side. So obviously there's good fit there as well. So you keep the situational folks, you keep the folks that are motivating, that are going to demand a lot from this team throughout the rest of the season. That's exactly what you need. Step two now, after you've appointed those guys, is how do you evaluate and treat the rest of your roster? Well, you have a you have a trade deadline upcoming here in just over 24 hours, a little bit more than 24 hours, that you could potentially move a player or two to grab draft capital to help out your future salary cap situations. One of the players that, of course, has been rumored around a bunch already so far has been cornerback Marshawn Lattimore. Marshawn Lattimore, if the Saints were to trade him, they save at least $16 million against next year's salary cap. Plus they receive trade value back in draft capital. Those are all positive things for New Orleans. And those are the types of moves they need to be focused on making now. What are the moves that you can make that will help you twofold in helping your salary cap situation in your future and get you more draft capital? Because those are the things you're going to have to sell to your next head coach. The tricky part about the next piece of the head coach search is about the timeline in terms of, are you getting a guy that's just going to help you through the next couple of years, or are you looking for your next long-term tenured head coach? Those are questions we're going to be looking at here in just a moment. And then lastly, you need to be evaluating your roster and the young talent of your roster, right? And so who are the players that you can still build around? That's what I wanted today's show to be about, where the players that you still needed to keep around despite that upcoming trade deadline. Players like Alante Taylor, players like Brian Brzee, players like, and I know this isn't in question, but Taliese Fuanga, of course, he's a rookie. He's not going anywhere. But you know what I mean? Like, you have to identify and get a look at that talent. See who those young talented players are that you can build your future around. You've got players that are going to be on your team next year, like Alvin Kamara. We expect guys like Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, Cam Jordan to potentially be back next season, although we'll see. This could be something that ends up triggering a longer ripple effect of teams saying, okay, I'm done, or players saying, okay, I'm done. Like, we'll see what happens at the end of the season. But that's what I think you're looking at next, is how you evaluate the young talent on your roster. As soon as you can get Bub Means back in the lineup, you get him back in the lineup. As soon as you can get Mason Tipton more involved, get him more involved. As soon as you can see more from Shamar Jean-Charles, see more from Jordan Howden, do that. Get a look at the young players that you have, not the veterans on one-year contracts. Get a look at the young players that you have and put them in situations where you can actually evaluate that talent. I think that that's very important. The next thing is, of course, going to be all the conversation around quarterback Derek Carr. You're not trading him unless you get him to waive his no trade clause. If he's willing to do that, then fine. That could be a situation to where now Dennis Allen is gone. Maybe he wants to go and work with a coach that he's worked with before, something like that. Certainly opportunities to go and do that. So we'll see if they go that route. I don't think that they will. Derek Carr is the type of person that's going to want to stick around and be around. We'll see what happens in terms of his contract going into the offseason. But really, if you want to make any kind of move, you have to make it before March when it comes to Derek Carr. So you're probably not going to get much opportunity to evaluate your young talent at quarterback, although the Saints could potentially go that route in the closing games of the season. So that's what I'm looking at in terms of where the Saints are headed so far this year, right? So far this year, you know who the interim is going to be. We have a pretty good idea who the defensive play caller is going to be. We know that they need to be looking at the roster, and we know they need to be rebuilding their culture. Then becomes the long-term rebuild of looking at building your future. And that's what we're going to dive into next here as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by Hillsdale College. Hillsdale College is giving you access to free classes for over 40 different free online courses. Those courses can include anything from literature like Shakespeare, studies on The Tempest and Hamlet. You can also dive into things like the laws of chemistry, mathematics and logic. There's a ton for you to check out. So if you're somebody that maybe has been away from the education game for a little while, want to learn some new stuff, here's a free way to do it, and it's through Hillsdale College. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can take them at your own leisure, and whenever you want to. You can tune in whenever you want to. Plus, you can get deeper readings, quizzes, discussions, and enjoy the lectures as well. So go right now to hillsdale.edu/locked on to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/locked on to register. hillsdale.edu/locked on. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, where you can get ready to tackle the NFL season with America's #1 sportsbook over at FanDuel.com. Because right now, new customers can put down $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. FanDuel Sportsbook gives you everything that you need to be able to place your bets all in the same place, place all your bets on the NFL, and it's all on one app where you can also check out live stats. You can get some play-by-play all in the same place where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Right now, the New Orleans Saints 3-point underdogs at home as the Atlanta Falcons are set to come to town next week. Maybe you think the New Orleans Saints can get back on the win column. Maybe you're not so sure. You think this win streak extends to 8. Well, you can get in on all of that over at FanDuel.com today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with America's #1 sportsbook and an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints have made, a lot of fans happy in terms of what's happening there, and have also made a lot of maybe one of the bigger moves that we've seen from this current regime for the New Orleans Saints. Remember, the only coaching search that this team has undergone so far was after Sean Payton left going into the 2022 season or following the 2021 season. This will be the first time they've actually made the cognizant decision to move on from a head coach and then end up going into the head coaching search. So that's where the Saints are going to go at the end of this season. We broke down why New Orleans made the move. We took a look at the immediate impact of the move. Now let's take a look at building the future, because if the New Orleans Saints want to build their most successful future moving forward, when they go into the coaching search this season, they need to hire someone outside the facility, no matter what it means for the people inside the facility. And that's a really, really tough decision to make. Dennis Allen has a long-standing relationship with the New Orleans Saints, and they still made the move to move away from him. That was something that I wasn't sure the Saints were going to do. Sentimentality, of course, being a big part of what happens in sports a lot. But the Saints looked past that. Gail Benson, according to Nick Underhill, meeting with the team last week, meeting with the roster, started to get a diagnosis of what was going on. Clearly, a lot of things pointed back to their leadership in Dennis Allen. So the Saints made already the tough decision, which again was the right decision, to move on from head coach Dennis Allen. So now the next thing you have to look at is, where do they go next to bring in new direction, new ideas, new faces, to bring in and usher the new era of New Orleans Saints football? And that's where we have to be really realistic for a moment. Are we really about to watch the New Orleans Saints undergo a single coaching search, or is this going to be the first of a couple coaching searches over the next few seasons? Here are the two realities that can take place. The Saints can go into this offseason and bring in a head coach that they feel like is going to be the guy that's going to lead them into their next 10, 15 years of success, because they're able to sell them on what the future is. They're able to sell them on what the salary cap situation looks like, draft picks, all those other things. That's the ideal situation. That's not always the case in the NFL. Sometimes you go into your coaching search and you watch the biggest and best names that are available go to the biggest and best opportunities available. And New Orleans might not be the biggest and best opportunity available this offseason, depending upon other coaches that get moved on from, what kinds of other teams become available, all those other things. Dallas Cowboys are a potential. The Miami Dolphins are a potential. There's a lot of places that some coaches would look at as better opportunities than what the New Orleans Saints may have to provide. That's why the rest of this season is so important for New Orleans, because they need to make the right decisions to set themselves up to be able to sell themselves to the best possible coaching candidate that they can wrangle. The second option is that you end up hiring a mid-level or low-tier head coach that gets you into your space where you do have something to offer, right? Get through 2025 into 2026 where you have salary cap space, get to clear your books, get to reset your books, get to reset your roster and begin your rebuild in earnest, and then bring in the head coach that you expect to be able to lead you through the rebuild and then into the golden era. So those are going to be the things that the New Orleans Saints are going to have to figure out. Which way do they go? Darren Rizzi is the interim head coach right now. Darren Rizzi will probably get an opportunity to interview to be the head coach. He was actually interviewed in 2022 before Dennis Allen was ultimately hired, along with guys like Brian Flores and others. But the Saints, might not look at him and say, you're the person that we feel is ready to lead us through a rebuild, because the New Orleans Saints may feel that they need to go outside of the facility as a whole. And I think that's kind of the right choice. I think Darren Rizzi is a fantastic selection for now. I don't know that he's going to be able to be the best selection in the future, simply because of the fact that he is too intertwined with what the New Orleans Saints have already been. The Saints might be looking for a completely fresh face, a completely fresh perspective, and a completely fresh approach to their future. So we'll see which way things go. I think Rizzi is going to deserve to be considered. There's no doubt about that to me. But that might not be the direction that the Saints want to go, completely independent of Darren Rizzi and his potential as a coach. So now New Orleans will instead have to take a look at whether or not they are bringing in a coach to manage their rebuild and then going back into the coaching search after that once they feel that the team is ready to go. Or do you bring in a coach that's going to be able to guide you through your rebuild and bring you success? Those are going to be two different types of coaches. Those are going to be two different types of conversations. Those could potentially end up being two different coaching searches as well. So this is where things can get a little tricky. We might not see immediate success from this team just because they went and hired a new head coach. They might be a couple coaches away from finding that. So just something to consider about what it takes to really find the foundational building blocks of bringing in and ushering in your new era. But the Saints are going to be an entirely different team come 2026. I can tell you that right now. New head coach. They'll probably have new coordinators. They'll probably have a lot of new staff. They'll likely have a brand new quarterback by then. They'll have new players on the roster, new playmakers on the roster, all that. And a lot of that gets started this offseason. You bring in the new head coach who's going to have and have a vision for the direction of where you head in terms of your rebuild, how you address free agency, what players you keep around, what players you don't retain, what players you let walk, what players you trade, what players you draft, all of those things. So that process begins this offseason. And on that, let's take a look at the draft real quick before we wrap up. A lot of people right now, with the New Orleans Saints projected to hold the number 3 overall pick pre-Monday Night Football this evening, the big jump that a lot of people are making is that the team is going to draft a quarterback. I don't know if that's true. I don't know that there's a quarterback in this draft class that is worth investing a top 3 pick that you want to build around. I don't know that they have the talent in this year's quarterback class. 1 or 2 quarterbacks might take off, but it might not be the quarterbacks drafted at the top of the first round. It might be the quarterbacks drafted in the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds, right? So the Saints are going to have to be really, really cognizant of that. The other thing that they can do is if they hold one of those top picks and they get on the board and every quarterback is still on the board, I'm holding up a big for sale sign and telling everybody to come and get this number 2, number 3, number 1 overall pick, whatever it is that I've got. I'm selling that like crazy so that I can get another first-round pick for that year and another first-round pick for the next year and another first-round pick for 2027 after that. I'm stockpiling as best as I can. So there's a lot of things that the New Orleans Saints will need to consider if they are indeed drafting in the top 5, top 3, depending upon who's on the board by the time that they actually come up, who's traded up, who's moved up, who's been injured, who's no longer available, all those other things. Talking about the draft in November, completely meaningless. We don't even know what's going to happen. We don't even know who the draft eligible players actually are at this point, or which ones that are draft eligible move in. I think if you're sticking and picking early, though, you go with the playmaker. Go and get yourself a Travis Hunter. Go and get yourself a Teteroa McMillan out of Arizona. Go and get yourself a player at a position that you know will translate to the NFL. Saints have had struggled a lot over the course of the past few years in seeing first-round picks pan out. Did a better job with Brian Brzee, did a better job with Taliesin Fuanga, but the Saints absolutely need to get things figured out in terms of how to maximize their draft capital. And it might be that the best way to maximize whatever draft capital they end up with at the end of this season, if it's a top 3, top 5 overall selection, might be to put a big for sale sign up and let teams come in and bid and see if you can build up more draft stock. And then you can take that sort of Houston Texans approach of building up draft stock on a trade and then going out there and getting, the assets over the course of the next few years. So this isn't going to be a one-off season rebuild. The Saints are not going to be in playoff conversation at the beginning of next year, or at least they shouldn't be. And if they are, fantastic. What a wonderful surprise. But more than likely, we're looking at a multi-year situation here. So it's going to take some patience. But the good news for the New Orleans Saints is that they didn't shy away from the challenge and they've accepted it, making the move that they needed to make which was moving on from head coach Dennis Allen. We'll have much more for you here throughout the week as we continue to look ahead to what this means for the New Orleans Saints. Very excited to be able to speak with Darren Rizzi later on this week as well and kind of get an idea of where this New Orleans Saints team is headed. So we'll have much more for you. Make sure you're subscribed, make sure you're following, make sure you drop a like, all the good stuff supporting the show so that you can carry along and keep up with everything going on around what is about to be a very tumultuous remainder of the season and off season for the New Orleans Saints. And if you want to get it first, join the Locked On Saints Insider Program by texting Who Dat to 504-285-7473 this morning. Before Dennis Allen was fired, all my insiders ended up getting information about the players that I spoke to that were over Dennis Allen. You could have gotten that as well. Join that Locked On Saints Insider Program so you can be a part of it. All right. Appreciate all the support, everybody. Thank you very much. See you back in New Orleans very soon. And of course, we appreciate you very much making us your first listen of the day. Go and check out Locked On NFL in the meanwhile, and then I'll be back with you later on. Thank you for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.